Hadi Naqvi from Usdaw.
National Award for Individual Organising goes to Syed Hadi.
Holy shit!
As an award winner of 2024. I'm back with another episode of Unmatched, and I am so proud today to be introducing a guest who is truly unmatched. Before I do, apologies if you can hear a fan in the background. It has been a heat wave in the UK recently, and I'm still suffering from it. This is not a natural tan, this is the heat wave. So, I want to get into this very quickly. I met my guest at Osdaw's ADM, which is annual delegate meeting, around 4 years ago. And it was my first ADM actually. Me, my guest, and a fellow trade unionist, we all got together. We battled to get onto the podium as often as we could. And we actually tallied up how many times we actually got onto the podium and who got the most reactions or got the best after speech reactions, and you know, there was friendly competition that really improved my confidence and pushed me even more to become a stronger trade unionist. But I'm now going to introduce my guest, Ryan Aldred. He is a proud father, a Socialist Party National Committee member, as well as a stand-up comedian. Has been both a secretary and assistant secretary of Plymouth and district general branch. He has held the post of Plymouth Trades Council Chair and has been an active trade unionist for more than 10 years. In that time, he has won a number of victories for members in game and successfully fought for Usdaw to campaign for £15 an hour as a minimum wage through their policy, and has a passionate belief in nationalising all public services sold off by the Thatcher era, from Thatcher's era to the present day. Well, I am immensely honoured to introduce my guest on the Unmatched podcast, Ryan Aldred.
Good
Ryan,
to see you, Hadi. How's
how
it
you
going?
doing, my friend? It's
Really
going
good. Good to
great.
see
How
you.
you been doing?
Good.
Yeah. So, guys, Ryan, I gotta admit, your hair's grown a lot longer since the last time I seen you.
It goes with the territory. Principled opposition to all cuts.
So, you know, Ryan, thank you for being a part of this, because I wanted to actually explore the trade union side. Now, I've had quite a few trade unionist guests on the show, but you've also a political committee member as well. You're actually a member of the Socialist Party National Committee. Your trade union roots are what I would say is classic left wing. Not totally to the left, but really is what the left wing was supposed to be about. You fight for people's rights, you give a voice to the voiceless. Yeah, you can be deemed as a militant person, but that's to make sure that as when is needed, that action needs to be taken. But you start as a diplomat. You try and bring people together rather than pushing people apart. Being a member of the Broad Left Committee as well, your roots within trade unionism has always fascinated me. So what made you go and get involved in trade unionism?
Well, it's a mixture of things. I mean, as you've pointed out, I am politically engaged. I've been a member of the Socialist Party for about 12 years now. And that's a big influence because it goes hand in hand. You can't represent workers if you're not where the workers are and they're in trade unions. But also, I've come from a long tradition. My grandfather worked in the Royal Mail for nearly 50 years, and he was always a staunch trade unionist. Whenever there was a picket line, he'd never cross it. He'd always be there supporting those that went on strike, and even himself went on strike a few times himself over that long period of time. So, it's kind of in my blood, really. But
That's great, because you've seen the trade union movement firsthand at the coalface, and it's indoctrinated within you. So what made you actually yourself, because you've come from that family background, but you didn't have to go into it. Was there something that clicked for you at that point that you have to do this?
I guess it was a culmination of a few things, really. Like when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a barrister, but when I went to do my work experience, I was really fortunate enough to go to the Court of Appeal, which is something that some of the solicitors in the firm I was in had never done. And it just so happened to be the one week I was there, and that kind of gave me an innate sense of kind of justice. But going into work, I started work back in what? It was about 2007, 2008. And I left when I used to work for what was Virgin Megastore and then became Zavvi. And after they collapsed and I was made redundant, I went to university, got a degree, tried to better myself. And then the only job I could find was going back into retail, where it seemed that the full-time job I had left to try and get a better career no longer existed. And I was, thrown into 0-hour contracts sort of working. And it was through that really that I kind of found my route into trade unions, because it was how do we challenge and fight back against this, and that's where I kind of found my home in Usdaw, as it were.
Hey content creators, this is my chance to do a quick review of a product I bought on the TikTok shop, and I think you guys are going to love it. It's a green screen disc that fits on the back of a chair. It can fit to almost any surface, and if you've got a area like a flat or a single bedroom or a bedsit where you're living in where you've got no space, this is ideal for those who are using it for things like Twitch, streaming, or just general YouTube videos. Like so. So get yours in the TikTok shop today. I'll leave the link in here. Yeah, because a lot of our people within the trade union movement, especially within the retail environment, didn't start off in retail. I found that within my journey, they came from different areas, different backgrounds. And what I also found was that certain people felt that, hold on, there's something not quite right here. This isn't what it should be. Work shouldn't be like this. And this was, I don't mean it in a bad way, but the typical average thing of a bad manager and bullying staff. And company policies were there to prohibit that, but it just seemed as though, okay, we can do what we want to do. Did you have a similar kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly that myself. I mean, when I graduated, for 6 months, I had a job as a university researcher, but they cut the funding to our department, and mine, one of the first in, so I was one of the first out, and then I ended up finding myself back in the job I'd left under worse conditions. But I found very quickly that particularly with when you come across all kinds of different managers, you find there are some that are absolutely fantastic and will bend over backwards to try and accommodate and build a team, but there are others that were awful. And the amount of times that even just having a manager that had understanding of their own policies was something that was severely lacking. And obviously that sort of reinforced really the need for me to be involved in a trade union, because it's the one way you can collectively organise to hold them to account, as it were.
And now that must bring its own challenges at times as well when you're trying to organise people, because in my experience what I found was a lot of people were scared. They were scared to say anything or do anything, and forget putting your head above the parapet, just even going and saying, no, I don't want to go up that unsafe ladder to get something at the top there. They felt compelled to do those kind of things. And a lot of managers would take advantage of that. I don't mean every manager, because there's a lot of great managers out there. But there were some who were definitely thinking it was their name on the door, as opposed to the name of the company they actually worked for. I've always found that the trade union movement's been a great level equalizer in that sense. You hold people to account.
Yeah, very much so. And then, I think my very first experience repping someone was a bit of a game changer, because Game didn't have a union recognition agreement or anything. I was very much the only trade union member in my workplace, and for years I'd almost felt like I was banging my head against the wall, encouraging people to join a union. But it was only, I had this kind of breakthrough moment when one of our members was in danger of, he was facing disciplinary with a possibility of dismissal. I went in and repped him, and the advice I gave him meant the difference between him losing his job and keeping it. And that was a kind of real breakthrough moment, because I remember coming out of that disciplinary hearing, and I almost had a queue of people ready to sign up to the union that day because they saw the power that exists within the union itself. And from there, not only did they have that security knowing that they'd have someone that knows the policies inside and out and can challenge management, but we then started to organize to try and fight for not just kind of defensive things, but trying to change things that would actually make their lives better and more manageable. Certainly in a sort of 0-hour contract environment, people are thrown from pillar to post. One of the first kind of victories we gained was it seems like a very small thing in the grand scheme of things, but we won a concession to make sure rotas came out a week in advance, which just gives people that little bit more stability in terms of how being able to plan their life a bit better, rather than kind of being at the beck and call of a manager that just couldn't be bothered to do the rota.
Yeah, we've all been there. I think that is a symptom in many of the sort of pay per hour as opposed to salaried type of work which is out there, that you're at the whim of someone else. But that leads to another thing, because you said it yourself, you banged your head most of the time to try and get people to join up within the union until you actually put the proof in the pudding and people saw it. Why do you feel that there's such a resistance for people to join with trade unions? Is it the media? Is it just history?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think in my experience, obviously, particularly working in the industry I was working with, game, you tend to get a lot of younger workers coming in. And often I think they kind of almost treat the job as a kind of stepping stone. You don't expect to be working in retail for your entire life, so you don't kind of have that same investment to kind of look at your conditions and be like, well, while I'm here, I'd want to have the best time of it. But I think there was also a kind of hesitation. Certainly, there was hostility by some management about even bringing a union in. But also, the biggest problem, or some of the biggest problems, one, it's very hard to convince people to sign up to a union when you're asking them to pay, say, like £10 a month, maybe even a little bit more, when they're only guaranteed 4 hours a week. And so they're a little bit more cautious about where they put their money because they're petrified about losing their hours, but also because they are only on 0 or short-term hours contracts, like 4 or 8-hour contracts guaranteed, they're more hesitant to kind of put their head above the parapet because they're worried that they'll be the ones that then get targeted and victimized. And obviously management can't victimize everyone all at once, and I think that was one of the things that was that breakthrough moment when I had that disciplinary, because so many joined up all at once. It kind of gave them all the confidence to do it, but it is a challenge that we've got to overcome, particularly trying to convince younger people of the necessity of joining a union, because ultimately it was that led us to then taking other victories.
Hey everyone, you might be lucky to get safety boots from your employer, and these are absolutely fine to have, but guess what? They don't necessarily have the right supports and can leave you feeling aches and pains, especially in your arches at the end of the day, leading to fallen arches. So make sure you get some arch supports. These are useful. They slip into your boot and give the same comfort as trainers, enabling you to walk around all day long doing all the heavy lifting no matter what the job is that you're doing, and you won't feel any pain at the end of the day. They will leave you feeling really good at the end of the day, so make sure you order yours at the TikTok shop for the price of less than a packet of chips.
So what do you think is needed to help talk to the youth to become members, or more importantly, understand the positive aspects of the trade union movement?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think certainly it would be useful to have a part-time rate. I know some unions do offer it, others don't. I think a part-time rate does remove one of the barriers to those that are in less secure work. It gives them that freedom to then join a union without worrying that it's yet another bill. Particularly in this environment where the cost of living crisis are still a major issue. Anything we could do to kind of remove those barriers is important. But I think as well as that, we've got to go where young people are, and that means not only trying to campaign in the areas where we are strong, and obviously it's important for us to do that, But one of the things that I managed to do was kind of pioneer in a workplace where we didn't have any union recognition or any union representation even. And so if we can kind of go out to more places and do some outreach to try and reach those workers where they're at, I think that can help to encourage them. And I think unions themselves have to modernize a bit. I think trying to get them more active on social media, I think like the Communication Workers Union have done some fantastic things. They've got their own like news channels and stuff that help get them out there in a way that's accessible to younger people. And I think that's something that we can learn the lessons from there, because if we reach the youth on TikTok or in some of the areas or Instagram or some of the social media platforms that they're engaging with, we'll be able to reach them and win them over.
It's true, because let's face it, the UK has had a strong history, legacy within trade unionism. From top bottom martyrs all the way through to charterism, bringing about the Labour Party, and so on and so forth. And I also see that the trade union movement not only just creates activists, it creates heroes as well, in more ways than one, because you're the person that people go to. People go to you because it's not because they're not strong enough to do it themselves, but 9 times out of 10, they don't know where to start. How do you go about dealing with a company's policy? What company policy relates to a particular aspect, especially if that aspect may go over 1 or 2 different company policies? Which one do you use to pinpoint things? We could talk about health and safety at work. The Health and Safety at Work Act, or the Equalities Act, or any of the other Trade Union Act and stuff like that, which is out there. This is really quite something, because in your journey, you went from your local area into becoming a chair within your branch. Now, for anyone who doesn't understand, so within the trade union structure, you have your local workplace, you have your representative in your workplace, you have your members there, and then you have your branch, which deals with more than just one place. It brings it all together. It's the entire union. Then it goes up into councils, regional council, national executive council, so on and so forth. So that's the structure within quite a few of the unions which are out there, GMB, USDOR, so on and so forth. But how did you develop your skills, when you was going up to becoming the chair, to stop being a rep, stop being an activist, and now start being that?
That's a really good question, actually. I mean, first of all, I was secretary rather than chair. I was chair of the Trades Council, but I've been secretary, and I'm currently assistant secretary of my union branch. And I think, it's a mixture of things. I think, I've always been an adherent of the phrase "a union is only as strong as its members," and I think we take it upon ourselves to kind of do the best we can to serve those around us. And I think I've joined the union branch at a time where it still had quite an active membership. I remember the secretary at the time stood down, and I was the only one that put my hand up, and I'd have been happy to let someone else have a bite of the cherry, as it were, but no one seemed to heed the call, and so I stood up to the plate. And I think getting that opportunity to be able to reach members and encourage them to do the best job they can to also represent others. I hear sometimes people grumble about how rubbish a union can be, and the first question I have to ask is, what are you doing to challenge or make that better? Because I think if all of those that did grumble about the unions that they have got into a room together, preferably in the union branch itself, that union would be a very different place. And I think for me, it's about trying to get as many of those voices heard, and then to organize those voices so that they are exerting their collective power.
Yeah, absolutely right. In terms of the union being as good as the rep, as good as the members, when I learned my shop stewards course, my tutor at that time, Fred Behardrian, this was shop stewards advanced course. It hit a nerve with me, because he was absolutely right. A union is only as good as the reps who are on the ground, because the reps are the ones who are actually doing all the hard work for the union. So if the rep is sitting in the canteen doing nothing, then the union is terrible. Even though the union is actually very powerful, but the rep isn't doing anything, then that's the impression that is widespread. And I had that. That was the thing that influenced me the most, because I became a rep due to the perception that the reps were not doing anything. The existing reps at that time were not doing anything. What they were doing was behind the scenes. But it still didn't give the impression that they were doing a lot. And the thing that I done was raise the profile of the union by being very visible, running around and showing everyone and acting that way. Me and Martin Webb, who were the reps who came along at the same time. Within your sort of challenges that you've had as an activist and a rep, what has been the biggest challenge for you?
Another very good question, Hadi. I do like a challenge. I think the biggest challenge is probably trying to get workers to see the power they hold within their hands. And I think,
Yeah, 100%.
it's one of those things where you kind of have to see it in action to believe it to some degree, but you have to kind of believe it to then put it into action. And it's one of those kind of chicken and the egg situations. But take my workplace for an example. Like, my intervention meant the difference between someone being chucked out of their job and getting to live to fight another day, as it were, and continuing to get paid and be able to stay in the workforce. And that for them was profound. And then similarly, some of the victories we scored afterwards, we organized grievances, we won a number of victories that it made a material difference. When when a worker hears about what a trade union can do, that's one thing, but when they've got, say, like an extra 500 quid in their pocket because you've challenged something and then they've had to be reimbursed, that's very different. And I think the more of us that are out there trying to do that, the better. And I think one of the other problems I've come across is sometimes I find reps that are almost burnt out because they try and take everything on themselves. I've certainly had discussions with this with other union members in the Trades Council, where particularly there was one case where I was speaking to a school teacher who had to rep for so many other schools because there weren't any other reps in those schools. She was almost getting frustrated because she wanted to do a good job and represent all those people, but it was killing her. The way I approached that with this person in particular was to highlight, like, when you speak to these people, are you just repping them, or are you putting the idea in their head that they could also do this job and help represent others? And they wouldn't be stretched beyond capacity like this particular rep was because they'd only have that school to deal with, kind of thing. And put that idea in the head that there's nothing special about reps other than the fact that they're willing to take that extra step and go that extra mile for their members. And if you're willing to do that, and there's lots of you willing to do that, you'll find that it quickly becomes an easy job because there's what is it, the many hands make light work.
Hey everyone, I got this massage gun from TikTok shop. I'm doing a quick review on it. So you have the gun itself, 4 different heads, and they're all worth it. Easy to fit on heads, easy to turn on, and different settings. So whatever kind of job you do, warehouse, driving, if you're coming back from the gym, hard day at work, this is ideal. And easy interchangeable. Even massaging, different muscle groups, different settings. And if you put more pressure on it, it will put more pressure on the muscle too. And this is really good value for money. I got it from the TikTok shop and you won't regret it. Costs less than £20. Compared to Amazon, over 50. So get yours on the TikTok shop today.
Well, again, that you've touched on something where it talks about burnout because they take on so many things. And new reps, when they get that power, whether it's a health and safety rep or shop steward or a learning rep, they feel they can change everything straight away, overnight. But in many circumstances, that is the case. I know that I did in more ways than one. But what advice would you give to new reps because you've definitely recruited new reps, So what advice do you give to new reps so they don't go through the burnout?
I think the key thing is to set clear boundaries so that you don't take too much on. But a good leader is someone that raises other people up. And so essentially a really good rep will replace themselves because they'll find other people that can do that job of repping. And I think that the key is to try and encourage everyone to become an activist rather than someone that is kind of consuming the union, as it were. You're there to play an active role in building that union, and that is where the collective strength lies, rather than kind of leaning on someone that then is doing the best they can. But we're all human beings at the end of the day. There's only so much you can take on before you can't take on anymore. And so I think my advice to new reps is to kind of find your feet, establish clear boundaries, but encourage all those around you to build the union and fight for your rights, because it's not down to the rep to do that. It's down to everyone to do that. And your life gets a lot easier when everyone's kind of pulling from or singing from the same hymn sheet.
Which leads to another point, because you're absolutely right. As trade unionists, we like to battle, and sometimes we battle amongst ourselves. But and I know that there's a hierarchy that needs to be followed. You can't just go out there and just keep fighting. You need to learn based upon experience and knowledge, so on and so forth, and walking the walk would be the best way of putting it. We can tell who is a trade unionist who's there just for show, in terms of whether it's a rep or an activist, they're just there for the show or for the expenses. And we can tell who's actually there to learn and develop and grow. When you've had confrontations, because it's inevitable, either as a secretary or as a chair, you're going to have people disagreeing with certain positions that are going to be taken. How have you dealt with it that you brought people around to your way of thinking?
Well,
or some battles you can't win?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there are some battles you can't win, and a good general knows when he can win. A great general knows when he cannot. And I think it's certainly, you've got to pick the battles that you are confident in winning first and foremost. But we're there to represent members, and so we should always be working in their interests. But in terms of how to kind of deal with those conflicts that arise, like I've always been taught the idea that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's best to try and keep to that ratio. And so you've got to listen to those other points of view, and even if you disagree with them, you might be completely opposed to what they're putting forward, but you've got to listen to the other side of an argument. And sometimes, even with those that you disagree with, there might be something in an argument that you might not necessarily agree with 95% of it, but there might be a little nugget of something in there that you hadn't thought of before that you can take on board. And that way you can more comprehensively represent people if you're taking all of those different views into account. And I think, what helps to become principles is to know where your own boundaries are, but to also respect others' boundaries as well. And there are going to be points where you won't agree on things, but as long as you conduct yourself respectfully and fight on those values, then that's I think where you can make sure that it's more of a round table discussion rather than a kind of squabble.
Well, that's, again, as advice, that's immense, because you're actually living it. But you're also I think I've got to say this now, we're also living through a time where trade union movement isn't party political. The whole thing about the Labour Party coming from the trade union movement, yes, that is true. But a trade unionist isn't about just the politics. And we're clearly seeing that there's a lot of members of the trade union movement that have been a member of the British National Party, or have been a member of Reform, because they're political parties. You're free to join whoever you want to join. How are you finding this now? Because the weird thing about the times that we're living in is that with the rise of certain alternative parties throughout there, and they have gained traction against the mainstream parties like the Conservatives, the Democrats, and the Labour Party, is that now we're seeing almost a contradiction between the values set down by the trade union movement, which is about equality, so on and so forth, fairness, and we've even seen it in the past with the strikers in Saris. Mr. Sai. If you don't know who that is, look it up. It is really a powerful moment in UK trade unionism history. People put aside all their prejudices to say, no, we're banding together to support these ladies for better working conditions. But how are you envisaging things at this moment in time?
Well, I think we're at a very interesting juncture. I think I would disagree that there isn't party politics involved in the trade unions. I mean, when you look at the history of trade unionism in Britain in particular, the Labour Party arose out of the trade union movement. And there was a very practical reason for that. All of the things that we try and fight for to better our members' conditions can only get you so far. I put forward the idea of £15 an hour minimum wage, for instance. There's no good a trade union having that policy if you don't then back that up politically. And so from that natural progression arises the need then to build a political party. And I think where the disconnect is today is that it seems that despite the fact that the Labour Party itself came from the trade union movement, it seems to have left the trade union movement completely behind. There is a major disconnect now between the leadership of the Labour Party and what you'd consider to be a rank and file trade union member who would have been maybe a Labour Party card carrying member years ago. But I think the shift we're seeing in politics today is partly as a result of people feeling like they don't have a voice. And I think the Labour Party ignores that at its peril, and I think is already seeing the effects of that. And I think, Paddy Lillis, the outgoing General Secretary, raised at the ADM or annual delegates meeting earlier this year that you need to vote Labour or you'll get reform. Whereas at this stage, I think my argument would be if you vote Labour, you will get reform for the simple reason that what Labour is doing at the moment, it's attacking disability rights, disability benefits, it's funding wars, it's siding with big business, whereas its historic role had always been to be the party of Labour. And I think because of that, people are looking for an alternative. And Farage tries to paint himself as an anti-establishment figure. He really isn't. I mean, he went to Dulwich College. If you look at his actual policies, it's sort of Thatcherism on steroids. But he poses himself as a guy that can smoke a cigarette, drink a pint down the pub, and he looks out for the working man. It's all complete tosh. Until we have a party that's based within the trade union movement itself that does fight for socialist policies and fights for what workers need, I think you'll continue to have almost a malaise, and out of desperation some will turn to the likes of reform. Hopefully we can build a party towards socialist policies that people can turn to, because I think if we did, as we saw with when Corbyn was at the helm of the Labour Party, you saw a massive shift in support to Labour because it was turning back to its traditional base.
Yeah, I mean, we know what happened with Corbyn. Unfortunately, the facts are there. He lost 2 elections, one of them being the biggest landslide defeat in Labour's history. But that is by the by. The fact is, Starmer is in power now. The members, you're absolutely right. There is a disconnect between the parliamentary party and the rank and file. The memberships, we've seen that within the stance on Gaza and Israel. You've got people someone will say, like what you said, funding big business, so on and so forth. But I don't know whether it is we gotta get ourselves into power first before we can start making changes, whether they are actually doing it that way. Personally, I think it is a matter of slowly, gradually, we're in power, we can make some changes here. But that's me. I might be a little bit naive. I am that card carrying member of the Labour Party, so hands on the table. But it's interesting that you've put it that way, that yes, there needs to be a massive push. And you've taken it by being a member within a socialist worker party, which is further to the left. Why did you go down that particular element as opposed to the Labour Party? What was the values, or was it especially when Corbyn was there?
Yeah, so I mean, for clarification, I'm in the Socialist Party, not the Socialist Workers' Party.
Sorry, my
they wish they could have me. But no, I think in terms of what you raised, like first of all, going back to the elections you've pointed out, I would hesitate to call them both defeats when you look at the fact that in 2017, you saw the biggest shift to Labour since 1945. And it was because of it was a much more radical and left-wing programme that Corbyn was putting forward. And I think 2019, it was more because of the weaknesses of Corbyn's, he hesitated on the question of Brexit, which historically had always been opposed to membership of the EU. But because he didn't put his position openly and let the right wing, like Starmer, for instance, roll over him, it meant that people couldn't trust him to lead. But even then, he still got over 10 million votes, despite the fact that obviously in terms of the actual seats they gained, it was disastrous. But you look at what Starmer was able to get in this most recent general election, he wasn't even able to get 10 million votes. And so you can see that he's representing a much smaller, he's got a much smaller mandate than the guy that lost. And I think I'm trying to get back to the question you actually raised at the end there. So you have to remind me if you can, Hadi.
It is based upon what we've got at the moment, the values. You didn't go into the Labour Party, but you went Socialist Party, making that right now, and went down that road. Now, I didn't understand why that would be the case. Probably it must be the values that they have are more furthest to the left than currently we're seeing with more centrist Labour. I think it's right at centre now.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, if you look at Starmer himself, I mean, politically, he's to the right of Thatcher. Even when you look at how far things have shifted, so that's how far things have shifted now. But in terms of why I got involved with the Socialist Party, for me, when I was growing up, I got to see the Tony Blair government, the Iraq War. I remember the petrol tankers strike, for instance. And so for me, I always kind of saw Labour as part of the problem almost. And I was less political back then, so I didn't have the grasp for trade unionism like I do now. But since I've been involved in the trade unions, Labour has always felt like it has turned its back on the union's voice. And obviously, when Corbyn came to the leadership, that did change. I was already in the Socialist Party by then. We did, as an organisation, apply to rejoin Labour because we could see the potential that existed there. And even now, hats off to people like yourself that are still trying to shift Labour in a much better direction. I take my hat off to you for giving it a go. I'm happy to work with anyone that's willing to try and do that, but you have to face the political reality. And for me, whenever I've seen anyone that has remotely left of set views, let alone the sort of Marxist and socialist views that I hold, you end up facing trumped up anti-Semitism charges. You end up being turfed out. You have the sort of party apparatchiks turn on you, and that's been my experience that I've seen, and particularly since Corbyn, I've seen that ramped up to 11 almost. There's been a kind of cutthroatness to the way in which Starmer has almost rooted out the left in the Labour Party to make it kind of a palatable party for the capitalist class to kind of allow to rule.
You're right. I have to say this because you're not the only one who said that. Many political commentators have said exactly the same thing, that the left hasn't been rooted out. The most famous example was Zara Sultana, the Coventry MP, because she did call it out. She called out many things in Parliament, and that got her whip removed. We also saw when, in the first initial days of the Israel-Gaza conflict, Councillor Martin Abrams, he's one of my councillors within my constituency Labour Party, had his whip removed and suspended because he took a opposing position to the party. He came back in, but the reality was he took that stance, and he's from a Jewish background. So we've seen what's going on there. It's kind of sad, but what I've seen with the members is they are fighting. They're still fighting, and they're using what they can to influence the best way that they can to keep that spirit of Labour alive. The left of centre, or slightly more to the left, to protect the services. Yeah, reform needs to be done. I'm not taking anything away from reform. NHS does need a little bit of reforming. The benefit system does need a bit of reforming. But to make it work, not to, and this is the worst thing about it, is that it's because of the accessibility. It's easy to go after those who haven't got resources compared to those who have got resources to shift everything away. And they keep forgetting that under the Blair era, they brought in a lot of legislation like Proceeds of Crimes Act 2004 that goes after criminals on a worldwide basis. That's still in UK legislation. Start using it. When Momentum are talking about taxing on worldwide assets, well, we can do that now. We've got those agreements, but that's a different conversation. I mean, when we're looking at capital as well, yeah, this is the other thing, because you've fought hard for workers' rights, but here's the thing. If the capital isn't there, how do we protect business as well? Because the businesses need to grow. And we know that a lot of the arguments that have been put out there, if you raise taxes, so on and so forth, the rich run away. We know a lot of that hasn't quite been as accurate. It's a lot more nuanced than that, because some people have run away because they were going to run away anyway. it isn't that. Those who decide to stay knew where, they want to build things up because the UK is still one of the best places to build things up. But I think there's a lot of bureaucracy, that I think as the trade union movement can actually try and work to get rid of some of the bureaucracy that's hemorrhaging and stopping businesses from developing. Because we're always out there looking for safer working practices, more promotion, better wages, better terms and conditions. But the battle with labour rights and and capitalism, they seem to work. It should work hand in hand. I think the question I'm trying to ask here is really, and try and get my nail, dig that hammer in, is short and simple. Socialism has been plastered as a negative word, but really it's part and parcel of a proper capitalist environment. If the capital is working properly, workers are being paid correctly, it goes back into the local economy, and people can actually live. You can buy more food, you can pay the bills, so on and so forth. Why do you think that there is such a massive opposition to these kinds of things in the UK?
I think in terms of, first of all, I'd ask where that opposition is coming from, because I think for most ordinary people, I think that's shown in
The right wing. I'm saying it now. I'm calling it out. It's the right wing that are putting it out there. Right wing media, the right wing, and these guys aren't what I'll class as proper capitalism. I don't class them as proper capitalists. I class them as feudalists because they've built, and the reason why I say it that way, they still believe that their wealth isn't in labor, it's in generating assets, So the more assets that you own, more land that you own, the stronger you are, because this is a feudal society. But if you look at the USA, it's based upon stocks and shares, it's based upon labor. The more people that you've employed, the stronger your company is. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. So that's why I'm saying, what I'm saying at the moment. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. No, it's interesting what you. I wouldn't say we've gone as far back as feudalism, although the fact we still have a royal family shows that there's still elements of feudalism still lurking. But if you don't believe in the power of the stock and bond markets, well, I'd go and ask Liz Truss where she is now, because that was the market making very expressly clear that she was a threat to their interests and their power, and so she didn't last as long as a lettuce. But I think Labour are going to come up against that same buffer now, because they in trying to please everyone, they're pleasing no one, and obviously they're not trying to please everyone anyway. I mean, they've made it abundantly clear which side of the line they're on, whether they're supporting working class families or big business. We're told there's no money to support the disabled, and yet they find billions and billions to fund Netanyahu's genocidal slaughter of the people of Gaza. I think in terms of what you raised, though, I think the idea that capitalism can have a sort of friendly face is one that, for me, it's a myth that needs dispelling. I think the idea, even Adam Smith highlighted that you need a happy workforce to be a productive workforce, but increasingly we're seeing labour pitted against capital, because ultimately either you make more profit or you have workers that have better wages and conditions. And I think rather than trying to say we only need to get workers to have a few more crumbs, the idea is, for me at least, as a socialist, that why can't the workers themselves run the bakery? Why do we sit at the underneath the table of the capitalists hoping they'll throw a few extra crumbs off the table? Because in terms of what you've raised, like looking at the way our public services have degraded, it's not only hugely damaging, but it's also completely nonsensical. It's costing us more in the long run, because all those people that are thrust into poverty today are going to be the ones that have mental health issues tomorrow, that are going to be the ones suffering and will be picked up by the what's left of a very crumbling system later on down the line. And so and even by their own admittance, I mean, in my street, even I've seen so many potholes being patched up, and it's more patchwork than it is road now. It would just make much more sense to invest in resurfacing the road. But again, they're just trying to sort of put a sticking plaster over what really is a major operation that's needed. And I think, in terms of what you raised, obviously, there will be those that ask, how can socialists support business? Well, if we nationalise the banks, if we brought the huge wealth that, like the likes of the oil industry, the energy companies, and all those massive fat cats that own obscene amounts of wealth, if that wealth was taken into the hands of the state and was used to fund, free public transport that was green, to be able to build council houses again, to be able to actually invest in our public services so that we don't end up with this kind of broken society that we've got, that would go a long way. But also by workers having more wages, if we achieve the £15 an hour that I put forward in the union as policy, workers would spend that money, unlike the tycoons and billionaires that just hoover that money out and put it in tax havens, or they may spend it on the occasional super yacht, but ultimately they are parasites. They're parasitic. Whereas workers, when they have money, they don't sit there and hoard it like dragons. They go out and spend it. If you've got more money in your pocket, you'll go to a restaurant, you'll buy more presents at Christmas,
They invest
buy
in the local
better
economy.
quality food. And that's where you see the economy rising from the ground up. And obviously, if we nationalise the banks and had them under workers' control and management, well, that would only benefit small businesses, because we could then offer cheap loans rather than having them being bullied and priced out, because they're much more interested in tailoring their business structure towards the massive conglomerates and multinational companies that have much more power to be able to lean on them to do their bidding, as it were.
It's funny you said that, because the TUC actually done a video that designed to do exactly that. This was during the early days of the pandemic, or just after the pandemic, and the TUC were actually putting it out there that, look, don't give those who have already got the money more money. Give it to those who haven't got it, because they can invest in the local economy, and then the local economy is not going to die out. Businesses are not going to close down, like the barbers, the bakers, bakeries, cafes. And we saw that during the pandemic as well. We saw all that activity during the pandemic. And again, I think the trade union movement done a really good job there by keeping people motivated, giving back the information that was needed to keep the workforce not feeling scared. Because COVID, no one knew what it was at the time. We were getting drips and drabs of information as it was coming through, and people were looking at not just the managers, but they were looking at the companies in that sense of, oh, okay, well, they've got a vested interest in saying X, Y, and Z. They were going to the reps, and the reps were coming out as an independent thing to say, no, they're right. Do it this way. Keep yourself protected that way. Keep putting that money in that way. So I think the TUC done exactly what you said. And if you guys get the chance to come to the TUC YouTube channel, you will see that video. It's actually a really good video, funnily acted as well. Which leads to the next part. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about politics. We've talked about capitalism, socialism. Especially, the sort of, is it a dirty word? It's not. It never has been a dirty word. It's actually just a form of politics. It's just a political stance. Like capitalism is a form of politics, economic side. But now I want to talk about your comedy side, because you've gone into the world of comedy, and at ADM, you are a very confident speaker. Now, a lot of people have difficulty getting up on stage and being a confident speaker. Most of the time, they're looking at the script, but you don't do that. When you speak, you're actually addressing the audience. Very rarely you're looking down at your script. So any tips and hints of advice? Did that come from your comedy background, or was that something you naturally developed?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly going back to a previous point, I think one of the problems we face at the moment is just that a lot of people don't know what socialism is. I mean, there are people now that still call Starmer a socialist, which is, for me, is just hilarious, because he's nothing like a socialist. But I think it's going to take. I think seeing people like myself working and seeing what a socialist actually looks like, it helps to kind of dispel the stigma that you get in the likes of the Daily Mail, which will paint. I'm sure we all have three heads and are here to eat your babies kind of thing. And it just isn't the case. Like, for me, to water it down to its simplest form, capitalism is about thuggery, violence, and competition. Socialism is as simple as we can do better if we share. We're collective. We're better off at working as a team than we are trying to fight each other to the death, even for limited resources. Anyway, moving on to the comedy. I think in terms of public speaking, like, it was through my politics really that I kind of gained confidence in public speaking, and I think that has played a big role. And I think, first of all, I'd encourage anyone to kind of give it a go. You find your voice as you start building that confidence. You'll be surprised to know, when I first got involved politically, I was the quiet one at the back of the room that never said anything and just kind of listened. Over time, you kind of develop that confidence to speak, maybe in the ones and twos, but then you start to address crowds. And I remember my first experience at ADM, I was really nervous going up to the podium, but as soon as I stood in front of, what would have been probably about 1,000 delegates and visitors, it just didn't faze me. It was almost like I was built for a big audience kind of thing. And I think, but I would say that certainly the comedy has helped with my public speaking. You know, the ability to kind of, when you're speaking, you're not just there to say what you want to say. You have got to bear your audience in mind, and the audience will give you cues, whether it's kind of clapping at a particular point, or if you crack a joke and they laugh. That is a clear indication that they're listening. And it is as much about listening to what your audience responds to as it is about what you're actually saying. And I think a very good speaker is someone that has their ears open even while they're speaking.
Yeah, and I tell you what, when we got up there the first time and were battling to get onto the stage, the other person was Troy Wibbleby. Troy Wibbleby. I think I pronounced that correctly. But he was a magnificent speaker, a great orator. I don't know where Troy is now. I've tried to find him on Facebook and other places, but I heard that he moved on to other areas in life, and I wish him all the best. But he's always fondly remembered, would be the best way of putting it. Because of that confidence factor that you've got there, it's amazing to see that, and inspiring as well. When you get up and speak, you're clear, you know what you're saying, and it paints a picture right away, and you emphasize your points as well, hard. That, look, this is what we've got to do, we've got to take action. And I've seen that translated in one of the fringe meetings I've attended, which is the broad left. Within our trade union, which is USDOR, the left, what I've seen with the broad left is trying to unite all members of the left. Whichever side of the left, however far on the left you are, or however centralized you are, we all share the same values of the left, would be the best way of putting it. It does mean it's actually quite good. What do you think the left needs to do now to actually push itself in the right direction? Not only to get itself into power, but also motivate the workforce. About, do they need to be more visible? Do they need to get into the local party politics, become local councillors? What do you feel is now needed?
Nice easy one there for me, Hadi. I think it's a mixture of things, and I think it's not one that's very easily there's no pithy kind of answer to it. I think one of the biggest problems we face is so many people feel disenfranchised. I think what's been clear, particularly as I've watched both the local and general election results over the last few years, is seeing just how many people have kind of turned their backs on it and a plague on all their houses. I would certainly not be proud to be governing in a with such a small section of the population actually engaging in it. That's why there is such a huge disconnect, I think, at the moment. But there's no, I think certainly the left needs to put itself forward more confidently. I think the fact that we have a broad left, for instance, shows because there's always this kind of the joke about the kind of Monty Python-esque kind of, are you the Judean People's Front or the People's Front of Judea kind of thing. And I think the fact that we've got broad lefts that exist show that it is a myth that we can't all coexist and get along together. And actually the left is very much in the ascendancy. I think a lot of, if you look at the trade union leaderships, they are moving more to the left. The likes of Sharon Graham, I think, as an example, where she is, she has one.
Matt Rack as well. Matt Rack from the NASUWT.
Yeah, formerly FBU. I mean, seeing
Yeah.
some of these left trade union leaders coming forward shows that the general trend is in that direction. I think we need to continue to try and reach particularly younger members. And I think obviously the strike wave that we had seen since 2022 played a massive part in that, because it it showed that workers have power, and then people were like, well, I kind of want to get involved in this. And obviously, we've got to kind of encourage that more. But I think, we do need people on the left to stand in elections and represent communities. But I think as well as that, and I would say, I think this is probably where we would disagree slightly, because you think that's still possible within Labour itself, whereas I would argue that we need a new party to do that effectively, that would more authentically and genuinely represent the interests of ordinary working class people. But I think it's not just about that. It's also about trying to develop a sense of community again. I went to I had my eyes open, really. I went to a Platinum Jubilee party, which is something I'd never usually go to. I'm very much a Republican, not a royalist. But I went to this Platinum Jubilee party, and what was abundantly clear when I went there was that no one there really cared about the occasion. What they cared about is that it was an opportunity for them to kind of have an excuse to kind of come together and have a street party. And the kind of challenging question I put to the people there was, well, why is it we've waited for a Jubilee for us to kind of give ourselves the permission to do this? Like, we could do this whenever we want. This is our cul-de-sac kind of thing. Why don't we do this again? And I think that in itself was quite an interesting thing to pick up on. I think that's something that is being eroded immensely, and obviously, part of that is down to the thing, like, the fact that things like libraries and community centres are being closed down due to austerity measures is eroding that. But I think it is also being, we're being atomized, and I think trying to gain some of that back is important. And just another little example, I've recently moved house, and managed to secure myself a very nice piano, and I had 5 builders get it into my van, but then when I got back to my place, I sat there scratching my head like, well, how the hell am I going to get this in the house now? And just like, knocking on the doors of a couple of my neighbours and being like, this is really random, but could you help me move a piano in? There was almost like in that the kind of the embryo of a sense of community, because now I know my neighbours a little bit. They're the ones that are like, that's that guy that ruined my lunchtime because I had to drag a piano in. But I'm like, these are those people that really helped me out, that I really want to, I'd like to invite them over for a drink at some point to thank them.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I also led to another thing. They've talked about childcare. They've talked about quite a few things in the UK recently, and I think this is more a worldwide phenomenon, because a lot of the global trade unions, like Industrial, will talk about this as well, and that is the erosion of the extended family based upon work. Childcare, many years ago, again, in certain communities, and I'll say the Pakistani community, the Indian community, whether you say Muslim or Sikh or whatever religious background you want to say, there used to be an extended family. There still is. The grandma will come and help with the daughter, or the daughter-in-law with the newborn child, giving a chance for the mum to recover. Dad still goes out and works, paternity rights, so on and so forth. All that's not the case now. And we've seen that in more ways than one. The birth rate in the UK has actually gone down. The need for migration has kicked in more again, but legalized migration, because right now there's the routes to migration to the UK is all over the place at the moment. Now, again, that's 14 years of Conservative Party not investing into public services, taking away and giving. And I have to say this because many political commentators have said the same thing. They gave their money to their buddies, and HMRC has been very, very weak in being able to recover that money back from those guys. Again, it's accessibility. How can you access the rich? Well, give them the bloody powers to go out there. They will go out there and get them, because a lot of these guys want to make a name for themselves. But I think the core family values, you're right, the community spirit has kind of eroded. And what I found within the trade union movement, it doesn't matter where you're from. When I go out to, let's say, a conference, people will talk to me. I'll talk to people like we've been best pals forever and a day. And that was the same with me and you. You know, naturally gelled, even though our political stances were slightly different. That's okay. We're allowed to have that disagreement here and there. But at the end of the day, we'll go out and eat together. We'll go out and have a drink. We'll have a laugh. You come on a podcast, that kind of thing. And I think that is the one area that I've seen. You know, if I look at Facebook, when someone from the trade union movement says something, every other trade unionist is on there. They are actually commenting on it. You don't see it from someone who's not in the trade union movement. This is the family. And I hope that in the future, because I want to bring this now, we're getting closer to the end. I like to leave this on a positive, which is a better tomorrow. I know I've talked a hell of a lot, but what do you feel as a trade unionist, as a socialist, as just yourself, as Ryan? What do you envisage as a better tomorrow for us?
Well, first of all, I'd actually start with my comedy hat on here because I've learned a great deal being involved in that recently, and it's interesting because when I used to, I've always had a great passion for comedy. I can thank my grandfather for that. He was a massive Tommy Cooper fan, and he was always very witty. He'd always poke fun at a new family member, or if someone had a new partner, he'd sort of poke a little bit of fun just to kind of test them out a little bit. And if they were willing, if they were game for a laugh, then he was like, they're definitely worth being involved with, kind of thing. But I think I found that it was a completely different experience, say, watching a comedian on YouTube than it was to actually getting people together in a room and forming stand up. Like there's a kind of it's almost magical when you get an audience going, and they may have very different opinions, they might have different viewpoints, so you can kind of play on that. But if you're a good comedian, over time you find that audience kind of melds into a single force, and it almost gains a life of its own. In embryo is kind of what I'd like to see more of in society. I think there's so much disconnect at the moment. We're being so atomized that there's almost a desperate need by those in power to try and highlight and scream about our differences rather than what brings us together. And I mean, it's interesting you raise about sort of some of the the extended families, and I've got friends particularly from an Asian background that do they've fared better because they've got that kind of support network that they've been able to rely upon better, even though they face all of the systemic issues of institutionalized racism and so on, than some of those that have kind of taken the kind of nuclear family approach and try and live in this single household bubble. Like, without the grandparents, for instance, I would certainly have not gotten as much sleep as I did in the early days of my daughter being born. But I would go wider than just familial links as well. It is like, who's going to help you with your piano, kind of thing, is the question we need to answer. And I think for me, the way in which we get to a better world is one in which we do care more for each other. And I think trying to build that sense of community up is vitally important. Trying to organize your street party is kind of like the beginning of that process. But going back politically as well, I would say that we have to challenge the powers that be. We have to, essentially dig out the ivory towers and push them over. We could easily have a much better society if we took the power and wealth off of the elite few that are essentially drowning the rest of us. And so for me, a better world is one that would see, rather than bombs being created for war, electric buses that provide free transport. Rather than seeing persecution of the disabled, we look after our disabled and vulnerable members of society. Rather than seeing how we can make a quick buck off the NHS, remember why the NHS was built. And even today, despite the immense barrage of attacks it's been under, it is still one of the most efficient and best and cheapest for what it does. Healthcare systems around the world. And the heroes that are in the NHS, they don't want claps, they want decent pay, and they want enough staffing to be able to cover everything. And I think, so for me, a better world is one that encapsulates all that, which is not a short and pithy answer, I'm afraid, but like I said, we need to tackle the big things, but also find someone that can help you lug in a piano.
I think what you've said there, the majority of people actually believe in. I'll put my hands on my heart and say that. And that's because that is what we want. We want our public services to be functioning properly. We want the rich to be paying their fair share, so that money can be invested into not only public services, but also making sure our most vulnerable are looked after. It's the elderly, disabled, so on and so forth. And people are united by what is more what we have in common than what divides us. And there's very few things that divide us. Very few things. Even if you look at the different religions which are out there. Hinduism, you look at Islam, Christianity, Judaism, the three Abrahamic religions, they all believe in one God. So, it's just me putting it out there in that sense. But Ryan, we're now almost at the end of this. So what I'm going to do now is say, how can people get in contact with you? How can people see when your comedy shows?
Well, I run a couple of comedy clubs in Plymouth. One is the Fortescue. We have an open mic night first Thursday of every month. I also run a comedy club called The Punchline. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at the Punchline SW with underscores between each word. And in terms of how you can get hold of me, I mean, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Obviously I'm a member of the Socialist Party as well. You can get in touch with me through there and come and find me at an USDOR conference. Like, I tend to not be someone that blends into a crowd quietly. You'll probably hear me before you see me most times.
Well, with that hairstyle, it is very, very difficult to... From a guy who's got hardly any hair at the moment, I'm quite envious. Ryan, I've got to say this. It's been an immense pleasure listening to you today. It's been an education for many people. I hope that a lot of myths have been dispelled from this, and we see more similarities than we do see things which are slightly different. But we can all agree on many things that we do want a better future. Because do need to be protected. And on that level, you've actually been that guy that is unmatched. Thank you so much for being out there. As always, guys, whichever platform you're watching this on, please give it a like, give it a follow, subscribe, share out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Why not get in contact with any of us? And if you want to be a guest on one of our future shows, and if you're unmatched in your area, whether it's in trade unionism, politics, business, or all three of them, come along, be a member. Let me interview you. I want to hear your story and share it out. On that note, guys, I'm going to leave you to it. If you guys don't know how to do that, then you all need to go back to school. So says the UK's TUC, organising award winner 2024, Syed Hadi Naqvi. Catch you guys later. Bye. And
Thank you for tuning in to the Unmatched podcast. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even more incredible stories. And remember, if you're unmatched in your field and have a unique story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me at hadi.naqvi@googlemail.com. Let's inspire others together.